Hi Prep4. So back to reading Friend or Foe. The end of the last chapter, the end of chapter 4, Davy was in a bit of trouble. He'd gone into some water and he couldn't swim, and somebody had pulled him out. So we are starting today on chapter 5, page 70. If you're following on at home, let's see who pulled him out. The sun was dazzling his eyes and Tucky was leaning over him. From somewhere there was the smell of wood smoke. "Davy, Davy, can you hear me? You all right?" Tucky seemed to be shouting, but David heard him only faintly at first. "We were right, Davy. It was a bomber, a German bomber, and there's 2 of them here." "Two?" "2 German pilots. One's hurt, but the other one pulled you out of the river." David pushed himself up slowly and propped himself on his elbows. The smoke came from a fire a few feet away, and beyond that, up against a low, dry stone wall, there were 2 men. Here is the picture. Goes alongside. There were 2 men in blue uniforms. One of them stood up now and came towards them. There was the black butt of a revolver sticking out of his belt, and David saw that he was unshaven. He was wearing only a shirt and trousers, and they were clinging wet. He crouched down a few paces away. "Your friend, is he well now?" He spoke haltingly, with a heavy accent. "He is better?" "You tell him, mister," Tucky said excitedly. "You tell him, you're a German, aren't you?" The man nodded. "We are German, yes." "See, Davy, there was a plane and it did crash." "You were in that plane?" David was trying to take it all in. "It was my plane, yes. We were hit and then we lost power. We had to crash land." His eyes were sunk deep in his head and his hair was still wet. "You were bombing Plymouth?" David asked. He could feel a knot of anger building up inside him. The man nodded slowly. "Their plane sank," Tucky went on. "That's what he told me. Landed in a bog. Remember Mr. Reynolds telling us that story of a horse and rider that was sucked down? That's what happened to their plane, that's what he said." "And they've been out here all week," David said, looking past the fire to the man by the wall. "S'pose so," said Tucky. That one's hurt his leg or something. He doesn't speak any English." David looked at them both. There was nothing threatening or frightening about them, and they were just 2 exhausted, pale-looking men with sad eyes and kind faces. They were faces he should hate. Perhaps these were the men who had shot down his father over the French coast and cheered as they watched him crashing into the beaches. These were the men who had bombed London and Plymouth and killed thousands. Yet one of them had saved his life. "He took your clothes off, Davy, after he dragged you out. They're over there by the fire. Should be dry soon. You were unconscious long enough." David had been aware of a roughness against his skin, but it was only now that he realised he was covered in a dark blue overcoat. His clothes were hanging over a frame of sticks by the fire. "My friend is not well," the German said. "He cannot move much and he is cold. I need food and blankets. The nights are cold here and," he coughs. "Will you help us, please?" "Help you?" David was almost shouting. He pulled himself to his feet, gathered the great coat around him. "Help you after what you've done? You come here bombing and killing and you want us to help you?" "It is a war," he replied sadly. "In war people die, on both sides." "Why don't you give yourself up?" Tucky said. "You can't escape, not if your friend can't move. And there are soldiers out there looking for you, you know. We told them about your plane." The German threw more wood on the fire. "Perhaps you are right," he said, "but we must try. We need time to recover. 2 days ago, we have finished the emergency food. We have nothing left, just water from the river. This is the first fire I have dared to light. We must keep warm and we must have food. Then we will escape over the moor to the sea and find a boat." "What about the soldiers?" said Tucky. They did not find us last time. It is a big place to search this moor. And what if we tell them where you are? David said, as defiantly as he could. Then we shall be caught, my young friend. I cannot move my friend any more now, and I cannot leave him. We are in your hands. And he turned away and walked back to his friend on the other side of the fire. What do we do? Tucky whispered. We've got to help him, haven't we? He saved your life, Davy. Pushed all the water out of you, and he was risking a lot to light that fire for you. You owe him, Davy. We both do. He's a German, isn't he? He's probably bombed over London. What if it was his bombs that hit the Perkins house back in Islington, eh? How many do you think he's killed? But he saved your life, Davy. He needn't have done it. He could have let you drown. As soon as his clothes were dry enough to put on, David got dressed. The two Germans watched from their wall. David walked over and handed back the great coat. Thank you, he said. The taller airman, the one who had saved him, took it and laid it over his friend. If you come back, he said, please bring us food. If you send the soldiers, then goodbye. David turned away and the two boys left them sitting there. And when they turned round farther down the valley, they saw a great puff of white smoke going up. The fire was being put out. It was still a long walk back to the farm, an hour at least, and all that time they had talked about what they should do. Every instinct except one told them to give the Germans up, to call in the soldiers, to tell Mr. Reynolds. After all, wouldn't Anne and Mr. Reynolds be pleased? Wouldn't the laughing faces in the village be silenced? Wouldn't their stock be high at school? And wouldn't everyone have to eat their words about the townies? And apart from that, they were Germans, they were enemies. It was a duty to make sure that they were captured. It was Tucky who did most of the talking. He kept on reminding David that the German had saved his life, that you couldn't turn on someone who had saved your life no matter who he was. But David was determined. He would tell Mr. Reynolds as soon as they got back, and leave it to him. By the time they reached the cottage, he was longing to break the news. Anne met them at the door. Where have you been, you two? I was worried. Then she caught sight of David's clothes. Davy, what's happened? She reached out and felt his shirt. It is damp. What on earth happened? I fell in the river, David started to explain. We'd almost given up, Anne. We were crossing the river and I slipped in. I slipped on the rocks and then... Lucky I was with him, Anne, I can tell you. The river wasn't that fast and it's not too deep there either. Still, it's lucky I was with him. Tucky smiled up at Anne. David was about to interrupt, but Tucky went on before he had the chance. And he can't swim. He slipped on the rocks and I leapt in after him and I fished him out. Where's a kipper he was, no doubt about it. Lucky I was there. And he preened himself, flashed a grin at David and went into the cottage. It was a brilliant performance. David just stood there gawping at him. He had known Tucky a very long time, and Tucky had never surprised him before. That was what he liked about Tucky. He could always tell what Tucky was thinking, what he was going to do. Until now, that is. And we will hold it there.